guys, it's Nikki here. I'm here today to do my Book of the Month review for Foundation by Isaac Asimov. I did the unwrapping at the beginning of this month and I wasn't sure what I was going to think. I have read some kind of classic sci-fi before and didn't care for it. However, I read this and I loved it. It's going to be my typical Book of the Month kind of review. There will be spoilers because of the questions I'm going to cover and how I'm going to cover the characters and my likes and dislikes. So if you have not read this book and don't want to be spoiled, I would click off the video now. So as I said, this is kind of like Isaac Asimov is considered kind of like this iconic classic sci-fi writer. He really helped define the genre. And because of that, I was really worried about getting into his book, just because he is considered to be so high in that in the sci-fi genre. Like he's kind of almost on his own tier, I would say. However, this book was very slim, which made it very unintimidating. I found out after the fact it's one of like 7 books in the series, which was way more intimidating. Thankfully, I didn't know that till I finished. So what this book does is it follows one of the foundations that is established by Harry Seldon, who's kind of like the main, not administrator. He's the one who manipulated everyone in order to have these foundations made in order to preserve the knowledge of the Galactic Empire. And the book itself follows the foundation after it's been founded, and it follows over a few different generations as it expands and becomes the entity that Harry Seldon hoped it would become. And it is helping preserve humanity through essentially another form of the Dark Ages. Although like way far in the future, once we've really nailed space travel and all of the things surrounding that. What I really liked about this book is it really showed the psychology and political maneuverings that were involved. And the book itself, even though it falls into the sci-fi genre, is really a political book. Like every point of view involves the government in some form. And it's the power moves done to gain what you need to move the foundation in the direction you want for what is the perceived greater good for this part of humanity. There's lots of psychology involved, there's a lot of political movements involved, and I really enjoyed reading about that because you typically don't get that, especially in the sci-fi genre. It's usually overthrowing some big bad. It's not creating a new government from the ground up, which is essentially what they're doing here. Along with the rise of the foundation, what the other thing they do is monitor through the different generations and points of view that they touch on, you monitor the rise and fall of other different political systems. And as I'm saying all of this, it sounds really, really boring. I loved it, but I also recognize this book is not for everybody. There is no action. Like it has very scholarly tones, very political tones, and because of that, it's very slow moving. So just a heads up, that is a big thing. And if you do not enjoy political or scholarly tones and along with the slow moving plot, this is not the book for you. This book is really just people being manipulated from someone in the past because of an equation that predicts a negative outcome for humanity. And reading it, I really enjoyed it, but it also gave me kind of a vibe from Cloud Atlas, just in how the points of view, even though you know they're connected, are very seemingly disconnected. And it also reminds me of The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. I think that's how you say her name. And just like the commentary on political systems, and you get that here too, even though it's very subtle. It's really all I have to say in summary of the book. I'm gonna dive forward into my likes and dislikes now. My first like is the psychology that was used. It's very manipulative, but really effective, and it's really fun to read because and they lay it out very well in layman's terms. None of the people that are using it they don't really have like a formal education in it. They just understand people and are using that to manipulate them. And so even though they don't outright talk about the psychology of it, you see it in action, and I really enjoyed that. Because for some reason, people manipulating other people for the greater good is fine in my books when I'm reading. The second like I have is that each generation kind of played into different strengths. Each character kind of had their own strengths, like political maneuvering, trading, manipulating on some other kind of scale. I really enjoyed it because the solution to each event that came up in each generation wasn't the same, and it was usually because of what the previous generation did, and I liked the way that it tied all of the point of views together. My third like is the political machinations. I liked the political machinations because they are seemingly negative in the short run to a lot of people, but in the long run, they really do a lot to extend the longevity of the Foundation as its own empire. And I found that really intriguing, the way everything played out. And my fourth like is that I really enjoyed the pacing. It was really phenomenal. It was slow, but it fit with everything in the book because there wasn't a lot of action. It was a lot of, for lack of a better term, like red tape and bureaucracy. The pacing really suited it, and it really increased those like scholarly political tones I was talking about. That's all I have to say about my likes. I will now move on to my dislikes. The first is the odd kind of farcical trial at the beginning of the book. It was very weirdly dramatic, and it was supposedly kind of how Selden expected it to play out. And for how logical he is, it was just such an overly dramatic scene that I rolled my eyes while I was reading it. It's important because it's how the Foundation kind of gets established, and I didn't particularly enjoy it, even though it was integral to the plot moving forward. Second one is the equation that Harry Selden comes up with, and the fact that it just perfectly predicts everything, including the irregularity and spontaneity of the human race and their actions. I think it's because he identifies linchpins to what each predicted generation is going to be like, but it's still very odd that it just seemingly so perfectly does it, and they don't really even attempt to explain it, and I wish they did. Maybe they do in later books, but they didn't in this, and it was a little sad. And that leads me to the recordings, which is part of this kind of like equation section. It's just, why are they so perfectly timed, and why is there no error in this equation? And I wish there was more explanation about the equation in Harry Selden, and I know that's in other books. My third dislike is just the weird lisp that you have from the ambassador during that kind of first iteration that you read. It was just super annoying, and it made a lot of words really hard to read, because the way that he was kind of dropping his R's made words very confusing. And I'm going to stop talking about it because I feel very ragey looking at it because it was just so difficult for me to get through. And that's all I have to say about my likes and dislikes. I'm going to go forward with my characters now. So now with the characters, I'm going to talk about kind of the main character whose perspective you were coming from with each generation, with the exception being Harry Selden. He's the first one I'm going to talk about. He's kind of like the manipulator, strategist, psychohistorian that sets the Foundation up, who's predicted the end of the Galactic Empire as they know it. He's the brains behind the equation that's predicted this. For all of this, he's really more of almost like an ideological or religious figurehead. He's really not that interesting in this book. As he's described here, he's not particularly interesting. He's just the guy that started it all. I'm going to move now into the first generation. And this point of view is from Salvor Hardin, and he is kind of a figurehead mayor. When he starts, he's under the auspices of the council, and he doesn't have any real power. He throws a coup d'etat and ends up overthrowing the council, becoming an actual leader, and leading what the Foundation is into a new direction, and increasing the longevity of this fledgling civilization. He was really interesting. I found him a lot of fun to read. Like, he does have a little bit of psychology, and he talks about his formal education in psychology, even though it isn't a completed formal education. And he works the political system really well in terms of nonviolent actions, and I really appreciated that. Even though he was super manipulative, it was with the best intentions, so it was a lot of fun to read. And I really liked how he was taking part in two different Selden crises. He led the Foundation through two of them over the course of his lifetime, and it garnered him a lot of fame, and his wisdom has a lot of longevity. The next one I'm going to talk about is Limar Ponietz. He's not as important in the grand scheme of things. His section is actually quite short because it's kind of a bridger section between Salvor and then the final one in the book. And what he is he's a traitor, like Trader. And what he does is he kind of gets sucked into this plot. A friend of his that he knows is part of the Foundation, even though very few other people know it, and he's in trouble and needs Ponyen's help. And so he does go help, and he really effectively manipulates and overthrows a staunch conservative religion that is very against atomic-based technology, and so it's illegal for anybody to sell anything like that here. His buddy is trying to do that and gets caught and is basically sentenced to death. And through greed and manipulation, not his greed, other people's greed and manipulation, he manages the least hostile takeover you could probably have that results in that kind of religious hegemony that was there being essentially overthrown. Very interesting to, it wasn't super interesting to read, but in the next generation you find all the fallout out of what happened because of his actions, and that was super interesting because it has far-reaching consequences. And that leads me to Hober Mallow. He is a kind of traitor turned politician, or he has political aspirations, I guess I should say. He's from one of the planets that's considered part of the Four Kingdoms that was initially absorbed into the Foundation. And his big thing is he wants a seat at the council. He wants to have power to help guide humanity towards the next kind of Selden crises that he suspects is coming. He's very aware of what his ancestors have done, and he takes a completely different direction, and he trades with this planet and civilization and very effectively cripples them because of it through this really drawn out revenge the dish best served cold kind of plan. And I really appreciated the nuances in it, and it was very interesting because he explained it well as it was happening. That's kind of where the book leaves off, is with him kind of finalizing his actions, moving, hopefully circumventing this Selden crises in time for the next, not ahead or behind schedule. So they have the next Selden Vittle kind of properly playing when it's supposed to give them a cinch more guidance. That's all I'm really going to say about the characters. There wasn't tons to say. They're very generational, and there's really, the way they're written, they're really just a tool for the plot. With that, I will move on to my Book of the Month questions and follow it up with my wrap-up and rating. All right, so I have 8 Book of the Month questions this month. The first of which is my usual. Is the book plot-based or character-driven? It's, I would say, more plot-based, but it definitely has elements of both because the characters are really used. There isn't a lot of development with them, but they are the tools that drive the story forward, even though the plot is kind of this overarching plot that's laid out and needs to play out too. What is your initial reaction to the book? I was super interested. They got into the psychology and the mathematics kind of right away and explained how what the equation was, kind of how it worked, what they were effectively predicting, and the statistics and math necessary to get there. So I found that really interesting. Third question, what is your favorite chapter and or scene? I would have to say almost anything with Salvor Hardin in it, although I really did like how he effectively, non-violently stopped the uprising of a kingdom trying to throw off of its religious ties and gain true independence. And the way he dealt with them was phenomenal. 4, how did the characters change throughout the novel? In this book, the characters changed not at all, because they were tools in each generation to effectively move the story. There wasn't any growth with each individual character, but each individual character grew up with the effects of the previous generation's actions pushing forward the situation that they are now coming to. And yeah, the characters really didn't develop. 5, how do you feel about the ending? The ending of this book, I really liked. Bit of a cliffhanger. You still mostly know what's going to happen next. It's going to be the peak towards the crisis. They've circumvented it, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't leave it too drama-filled into what's going to happen next. I really liked it. 6, what was the pacing like? The pacing was slow, but I think it was effective because it gave the reader time to get as much information as necessary to move forward without feeling rushed or skipping anything, and it increases the scholarly tones and the political tones. 7, if you could read from any part of this book from another character's point of view, whose would it be? I really like to read some of the political rivals, or for lack of a better term, like the upstarts. Like there's, especially after Hardin goes to Ascone and deals with the situation there, it'd be awesome if you could get a little bit of the fallout. And then question 8. Would you read another book by this author? I would have been wary had you asked me at the beginning, and by the time I finished this book, I would say, heck yes. I really enjoyed this. It was a really interesting kind of political, psychological read. I really understand why, based on this book alone, why Isaac Asimov is held in such high esteem. I really enjoyed the writing, although it was slow and some of the material could be dry. He did a really effective job of keeping the humanity of each person and kind of their personality in the situation, keeping the material from getting too dry. I found it really interesting. I found it really intriguing. I definitely read more of this series, and I would definitely give another book by Isaac Asimov a try. And with that, the Book of the Month questions come to a close, and I will just do my quick wrap up here. So overall, I really enjoyed this book. Although the pacing was slow, I found it very effective for the tone of the story and the tones in the writing, both scholarly and political. I loved the political and psychological maneuvering that was taking place, especially since all of it was kind of this for the greater good. That being said, the characters, some of them were really interesting, but they were all pretty flat. There wasn't a lot of time for development because they were used specifically as tools to move the plot forward. There really wasn't time for the characters themselves to develop. That being said, that wasn't that terrible of a thing. They did their job well, and it was really interesting to see future generations talk about past generations as we moved forward. The only really annoying thing for me was the equation and its kind of perfection, and how it always predicted all of these things, all these different statistics, and how we just didn't get enough information about why it worked. And I hope we get more information about why it worked. And it's just, the damn recordings were just the weirdest part, and I will give you the rating. So for Foundation by Isaac Asimov, I'm going to give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. For the reasons listed above, I really enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it enough that I would read more of him and more of this series. But I also recognize that this book isn't for everyone. As I said, it's very slow paced, lots of political and psychological maneuvering going on. And if that is not your thing, this isn't something you're going to enjoy, even if you enjoy science fiction. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.